The very idea that Muhammad should be a prophet of peace and tolerance is greeted with howls of derision and hilarity by many people in the West. But it is precisely this claim that is defended in a very recent book by a top Western academic, John Cole, in his book Muhammad, Prophet of Peace Amid the Clashes of Empires. John Cole is professor of history at the University of Michigan, and he has a PhD in Islamic studies. This book has received rave reviews on the back cover. If you know anything about Western scholarship on Islamic history and Islam, you would have heard the name of Fred M. Doner, professor of Near Eastern history at the University of Chicago, and he writes about this book. John Cole's Muhammad draws deeply on the text of the Qur'an and on a vast selection of the best modern scholarship to make a convincing case for Muhammad as apostle of tolerance and peace. Cole shows how this original message of peace, consistently articulated in the Qur'an, was distorted by later Islamic tradition and denied by more than 1,000 years of European polemic against Islam, filled with astute observations at every turn. That's quite a ringing endorsement. There are other reviews by other leading Western academics, specialists in the field as well. Now, I admit I haven't read all of this book. I've only read the early parts of it, but it looks very promising. And I just wanted to read the preface because it contains a summary of his thesis. The notes, by the way, to the various chapters are packed full of scholarship. I mean, this guy is incredibly well read in all the scholarship in the field, and he can read the Arabic and Greek as well. So agree with it or not, he's certainly worth taking very seriously as a scholar in the field. In the preface then to his book, he writes the following. The New World religion of Islam arose against the backdrop of a 7th century Game of Thrones between the Roman Empire and the Sassanian Empire of Iran that was fought with unparalleled savagery for nearly 3 decades. The imperial armies zigzagged bloodily across the Near East, the Fertile Crescent, Asia Minor and the Balkans. Although the Qur'an makes it clear that this struggle between the rival emperors, which contemporaries called the two eyes of the earth, formed an essential context for the mission of the Prophet Muhammad, historians have only recently attempted explorations of the latter's work and thought within this framework in mind. This book puts forward a reinterpretation of early Islam as a movement strongly inflected with values of peacemaking that was reacting against the slaughter of decades-long war and attendant religious strife. From the Crusades to colonialism, conflicts between Christians and Muslims led to a concentration among writers of European heritage on war and Islam, leaving the dimension of peace and cooperation neglected. Both peace and war are present in the Qur'an, just as they are in the Bible, but both will be analysed below, but the focus here is on peace. This book studies the Qur'an in its historical context rather than trying to explain what Muslims believe about their scripture. The Qur'an insists on liberty of conscience and forbearance towards enemies, and it prohibits unprovoked aggressive warfare. It promises salvation to all righteous monotheists and not just to followers of the Prophet Muhammad. That many outsiders and a not inconsiderable number of adherents have associated it with none of these values, and indeed have often interpreted it as upholding the converse, demonstrates how badly it has been understood. The misapprehensions came about for many reasons, including the imperial ideologies of the later Christian Byzantine and Muslim Abbasid empires, difficulties in interpreting the text, and a failure to read it against contemporary Roman and Iranian texts, a procedure that allows us to compare and contrast its values and concerns with those of others living in the era. The Iranian invasion of Roman territory from 603 AD forward threatened the independence of Western Arabia, where Muhammad was based. The Sassanian conquest of Jerusalem in 614 struck contemporaries as apocalyptic and provoked a mystical response from the Prophet. A close reading of the Qur'an shows that a profound distress at the carnage of the age led Muhammad to spend the first half of his prophetic career, 610 to 622, imagining an alternative sort of society, one firmly grounded in practices of peace. The Qur'an repeatedly instructs believers to repel evil with good, pardon their persecutors, and wish peace on those who harassed them. These verses have as their greater context the outbreak of struggles among Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and a remnant of pagans who were partisans in the clash of empires raging around them. Muhammad in these years resembles much more the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount than is usually admitted. Scholars have increasingly also tied the second half of Muhammad's career, 622 to 632, to the maneuverings of Rome and Iran, even suggesting that his move to Medina from his hometown of Mecca may have been connected to Roman diplomacy. I argue that Muslims in the time of the Prophet were explicitly allied with the Christian emperor Heraclius, who reigned between 610 and 641, and indeed that Muhammad saw his defensive battles against the truculent pagans in places such as Badr and Uhud in West Arabia as protecting Roman churches in Transjordan and Syria to the north. It is likely these militant Arabian pagans had allied themselves with the Iranian King of Kings. In short, Islam is, no less than Christianity, a Western religion that initially grew up in the Roman Empire. Moreover, Muhammad saw himself as an ally of the West. The Prophet in those years of pagan attacks did not abandon his option for peace, but moved toward a doctrine of just war, similar to that of Cicero and late antique Christian thinkers. He repeatedly sued for peace with a bellicose Mecca, but when that failed, he organized Medina for self-defense in the face of a determined pagan foe. The Qur'an insists that aggressive warfare is wrong, and that if the enemy seeks armistice, Muslims are bound to accept the entreaty. This disallowing of aggressive war and search for a resolution, even in the midst of violent conflict, justifies the title Prophet of Peace, even if Muhammad was occasionally forced into a defensive campaign. The Qur'an contains a doctrine of just war, but not of holy war, and does not use the word jihad with that later connotation. It views war as an unfortunate necessity when innocence and the freedom of conscience are threatened. It strictly forbids vigilantism, in other words, just taking violence into your own hands, and equates premeditated killing of non-combatants with genocide, paraphrasing in this regard Jewish commentaries on the Bible in the Jerusalem Talmud. The Qur'an, read judiciously alongside later histories, suggests that during Muhammad's lifetime, Islam spread peacefully in the major cities of Western Arabia. The soft power of the Qur'an's spiritual message has typically been underestimated in most treatments of this period. I like this expression, the soft power of the Qur'an's spiritual message, because this has been consistently ignored by Western scholars. If the Qur'an was just an artifact, the Qur'an is an incredibly powerful social as well as a spiritual transformative force in humanity and has shaped civilizations. He continues, the image of Muhammad and very early Islam that emerges from a careful reading of the Qur'an on peace-related themes contradicts not only widely held Western views, but even much of the later Muslim historiographical tradition. This finding should come as no surprise. Life in medieval feudal societies did not encourage pacific theologies, and Muslims in later empires lost touch with the realities of the early 7th century. What if we read Jesus' life and thought only through the lens of Pope Urban II, who launched the sanguinary crusades in the Holy Land with the cry, "God wills it." Even today, many scholars of early Islam seem unduly deferential towards later medieval interpreters. Others radically reject all information in those sources, treating Muslim histories differently from Byzantine or Carolingian chronicles, once again condemning non-Europeans to being a people without a history. The Qur'an tells us about that history if we will listen to it, and it tells us what is plausible in the later biographies of the Prophet. And that's the end of the preface. So I do recommend this book. It's very readable. The scholarship is impeccable. And it argues a case which many people in the West will find hard to believe, but it's based on extremely good historical evidence and the Quran itself. Until next time.